So, as the Tank Museum in Bovington has thus far failed to contact me regarding my top 5 tanks, this despite their having so far fielded Colonel Lindybeige, yes, Colonel Lindybeige, and that complete bounder, Mr. Squire, I guess it is high time I presented the internet with the final word on this matter, explaining just which were in fact the best ever tanks. Now it goes without saying that no tank claiming to be something akin to the best tank could ever be anything other than British. Or to put it like this, it can indeed be something somewhat foreign, as long as the world's greatest tank nation, the United Kingdom, has provided some sort of touch to elevate the merely mundane to the extraordinary. So let's be clear, the British invented the tank. If it were not for us, there would be no such thing. Therefore, we know what makes a good tank. So what one needs to consider is what truly makes a tank extraordinary. What sets a top tank apart from others? Now, of course, some ill-educated fools have forwarded various German vanity tanks among their top choices, usually such named after various feline creatures. These models are perfectly sufficient if you have an area the size of Liechtenstein to defend, a limitless supply of spare parts, total air superiority, and a terrain as flat as a pancake. Anything beyond that, and all of a sudden you run into difficulties. Therefore, clearly the two greatest standard tanks ever conceived were the American Sherman and its superior British counterpart, the Churchill. These two, however, in their standard setup would never make my list, not least as the colonial model in particular had a habit of catching fire. No, to qualify as one of the 5 greatest tanks of all times, you need that special something. And that is where a category of tanks enters, which the British liked to refer to as the funnies. These were Second World War vehicles. They are often called Hobart's funnies. Major General Percy Hobart commanded the 79th British Armoured Division and led the development of specially adapted tanks for use during the invasion of Western Europe. These tanks were not merely engineering marvels. They are exercises in problem solving. They are examples of human ingenuity. Moreover, they showcase that beautiful British capacity somehow to muddle through, to find a makeshift solution for what others deem impossible. So the funnies were the result of a remarkable, somewhat haphazard research and development program under Hobart's supervision, which created a veritable smorgasbord of prototypes and wacky mechanisms in order to seek to provide the Allies with a technological advantage. This followed the disastrous Dieppe raid in 1942, in which the Churchill tanks had never got off the beach. If one was to perform a successful landing and get past any German coastal defences, one needed to provide one's forces with some special oomph. The number 5 of my top tanks is the Churchill AVRE or AVRE, whichever you prefer. AVRE stands for Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers. On first impression, it looks like a Churchill. Yet when you regard its turret, you very quickly conclude that there is something strange going on there. What at first impression looks like a gun turns out to be some sort of mortar for launching 290mm demolition charges at the enemy. This thing could launch up to about 100 yards a 40-pound petard, which the enemy sure knew about when it came down on him. The idea of this petard, or flying dustbin as the crews called it, was to simply crack open concrete pillboxes with the sheer force of its explosion. Churchill AVRE models also could be seen carrying around fascines if the need arose. This was a solution from the First World War, which allowed you simply to drop this giant bale of wood into an enemy trench if it proved too wide for you otherwise to cross. Mind, first the crews needed to learn to carry these fascines at the front of the vehicle, as the initial attempts to carry them at the back tended to have the tank's exhausts set fire to the wood. And it was generally deemed bad form driving about the European continent with a vehicle that resembled a Guy Fawkes bonfire. The number 4 of my top tanks is the Sherman Crab. Now, of course, the Sherman being American, it has the whiff of the foreign about it, but the engineering surrounding what makes this so special was entirely British. It was the adoption of this bizarre flail which simply battered any minefield into submission, clearing a ready way for any other tanks or infantry on such things as Normandy beaches, which set this tank apart from others. Now, as you can see, it is a perfectly functional tank, which can still shoot at the Germans. But to be in possession of a vehicle which simply drives a highway through a supposedly impassable enemy minefield surely gives any attacking force a major advantage. Number 3 of my top tanks is the Churchill Crocodile. This was a flame-throwing tank. Now, the British being an ingenious lot, they realised, unlike some others, that placing your crew into a tank with a great deal of flamethrower liquid might not be a good idea. Therefore they engineered a handy trailer for the tank, which contained the sticky, thickened flamethrower liquid. Now, for many, the jury is out on this particular weapon. Flamethrowers are nasty things indeed. Burning people to death is not a pleasant pastime. Therefore it is hard to like this tank. But what wins me over is the fact that the flamethrower could also be operated without the pilot light which set the liquid alight. This could be used for dousing your target with liquid before you finally fired a flaming volley to set it all ablaze. That said, I believe to recall having heard that crews would often operate what they referred to as a splash and dash. For you see, if you are the hapless Germans cooped up in a concrete pillbox, then suddenly this Churchill Crocodile with its surprisingly accurate flamethrower gives you a squirt or two through your firing slits and you find yourself covered in sticky flammable goo, will you hang around to wait for it to repeat the same action with added spark? Or will you run for it? Hence the expression splash and dash. The British splashed and the Germans dashed. It is for that reason that I have included the Churchill Crocodile among my favourites. Forgive me, but the idea of a war in which the parties squirt each other with liquids until one side runs away somehow appeals to me. Number 2 of my top tanks is the dummy tank. Yes, it's not a tank. I am sorry if some of you will think I'm cheating here, but think about it. The dummy tank is the one that makes you think it is a tank, whereas in fact it is no such thing. Its invention goes back as far as the First World War. The general idea is to make your enemy believe that your tanks are in fact somewhere where they are not. This enables you to concentrate your tanks for an attack, while the enemy's reconnaissance and spies assure him that they are where they always were. This of course was brilliantly put into practice prior to the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, where the Allies managed to create entire fake tank battalions, apparently readying for an invasion across the Channel at Calais. So the tank, which is not a tank, can be as effective a weapon as the tank itself, if used cunningly. Finally, the number 1 of my top 5 tanks is the Sherman DD. The Sherman DD is the floating tank. Yes, some chap in the Funnies programme, I think he was Hungarian or some such thing, came up with the incredible idea of making a tank float by simply increasing the amount of water it displaced. This was simply achieved with a canvas skirt which could be elevated around the vehicle. A bit of clever engineering then saw the tank's tracks actually power a sprocket at the back to drive the propellers which allowed for propulsion when in the water. Now, this was the only one of the funnies which the Americans actually chose to adopt. Sadly, when they launched their tanks during the assault on Omaha Beach, they did not observe the minimum distance to the shore. The waters out there were still far too choppy and therefore almost all of them sank. Omaha Beach proved the most bloody of the Allied landings that day. Now consider the difference it would have made had the American infantry landed on Omaha Beach complete with ready tank support. The funnies were odd contraptions, but they did do a great job. The British forces, whose command had readily embraced all the funnies and let them loose on the beach in Normandy, fared much better. Ungainly as they may have looked, these were in fact war-winning weapons. Now I think you will all agree that my choices, in particular my flawless reasoning, sets my selection of top 5 tanks well above that of the lesser mortals the Tank Museum in Bovington has so far approached. And Messrs. Squire and Lindybeige, I do hope you have learnt something from watching this. Maybe like that you won't make quite such embarrassing mistakes as with your abysmal top 5 tank choices in future. That is all from the Saber Pass for now. Thank you very much, and goodbye.